Sam. I'm making this video about Kala Sarpa Yoga. And Kala Sarpa Yoga is when all the planets are in between the nodes. Rahu and Ketu. You know, Rahu and Ketu exist on an axis that brings in two signs that are opposite each other. So they could be in Leo Aquarius, they could be in Virgo Pisces, they could be in Libra Aries. And when you have the Kala Sarpa Yoga, you'll have this axis. Let's say it's between Rahu in Leo and Ketu in Aquarius, and then all the other planets exist either with in between one or the other. So typically we'll have a few planets on one side of the node and then a few planets on the other side of the node. But when they all fall in between, then you'll have the Kala Sarpa Yoga. Now this is either in a natal chart, like in a birth chart, or in the chart of the sky. When you have it in the chart of the moment, you can have Kala Sarpa Yoga happening for months. If you get all the planets in between the nodes, then usually it's the Sun or Mercury or Venus that'll break the Kala Sarpa Yoga, because Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars move more slowly. But you'll also have the Moon will break out of the Kala Sarpa Yoga every 2 weeks, and then it'll dip back into the Kala Sarpa Yoga again. So when we analyze this placement, let's say that it's in a natal chart, then the themes of the nodes, based on the houses and signs they occupy, will become major evolutionary forces in that lifetime. And so I use the example of Rahu in Leo, Ketu in Aquarius. Let's say that was a natal chart, then those issues, like Rahu in Leo is about a kind of fixation on our personal power and strength. Ketu in Aquarius is turning away from a more collective imperative. So that on a sign level, that's what that axis means. And then if that sign axis fell, let's say in the 6th and 12th house, then let's say it was Rahu in the 6th house, Ketu in the 12th house, let's say it was Pisces, then that Rahu in the 6th in Leo would be focusing on all the world's, all the problems and difficulties and stresses and battles. Rahu would be obsessed over that because it's in the 6th, and Ketu in the 12th would be turning away from surrender, letting go, loss, because we would be fixated on fixing the problems rather than being able to let go. So that's how you would read that in a natal chart. When it happens in a worldly chart, like through, a few months at a time or a few weeks or however long, then the sign axis becomes more important because the ascendant keeps changing, but during that period of time, you'll be able to see those themes. So, for instance, the themes of Rahu and Leo, which are about the government, the kingdom, our leaders, our guiding principles, both individually and collectively in the world, are being obsessed over and focused on. And the Ketu end, which is more about, and the Ketu in Aquarius would be turning away from things like our social duties, social commitments, social responsibilities, and we'll be asking really deep questions about what's more important, both personally and collectively, and of course with our government and with the world, and those kinds of things will be very important during that time. And then of course when Rahu and Ketu join any planets during the Kala Sarpa Yoga, any planets they're joined, either one is also going to be important. So for instance, if Rahu is joined Jupiter in Leo, then it's going to even conflate that even more around leaders and their philosophies and principles and teachings, and our identity, both individually and collectively as a result. So again, these become confusing themes and a certain dynamic that gets worked out. Now the other thing that's really important is you want to look at the direction of the Kala Sarpa Yoga. Remember, the nodes move backwards. They move backwards. They don't move forward, they move backward. So for instance, let's say that you have this Kala Sarpa Yoga in Leo and Aquarius, and all the planets are between, all of the planets are in Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Aquarius. They're in between on that level, rather than the Kala Sarpa where they would be between Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. So you can have the Kala Sarpa going in either direction. That would indicate that the planets are either in between Ketu and Rahu or in between Rahu and Ketu, right? Remember, the nodes move backwards. So for instance, if you have all the planets in Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, then they're in between Ketu and Rahu. Ketu is the front end of the node because the nodes move backwards. So that means that it's a Ketu Kala Sarpa. Same is true in a natal chart. You always remember the nodes move backwards, and you see that whatever the house and sign axis is, they're being driven by that end of the node. So whatever is on the leading edge of the nodal axis is the one that it's showing whether the karmas are being exploded and developed, which would be Rahu on the leading end of the nodal axis, or if the karmas are being finished and completed, and they're a result of a lot of past momentum, where we're finishing a cycle, where we're completing a cycle of karma, which would be shown by Ketu, end of the node. So as I record this video, we have a Kala Sarpa Yoga in the sky in February, end of February 2016, and all the planets are in between Ketu and Rahu, because Ketu is in Aquarius, Rahu is in Leo, and all the planets are in between Ketu as he's moving backwards. Again, if all the planets were in between, if they were in Aries, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, then Rahu would be on the leading end of the node because Rahu is moving back. So these qualities of Ketu leading the Kala Sarpa Yoga shows that right now we're in a state of completing a lot of karma, finishing enormous amount of karmas around our collective duties, responsibilities in the world. All the planets are in the jaws of the nodes, and especially Ketu is finishing and completing. This is why when we look around the world, all of this karmic decisions from the last 15, 20, 30 years, it seems like is kind of culminating in something it's trying to finish an old cycle. You can see it very clearly in the politics of the U.S., which, where I live. Of course, political themes are all over the place with this Kala Sarpa Yoga. I've been saying it for a long time. When Rahu goes into Leo, Ketu and Aquarius, this is very much about politics. Leo is the sign of the king, sign of government. Aquarius, which is where Ketu is very much about the society in general. So this nodal axis has to do with that, and now with the Kala Sarpa, Ketu is like grinding to completion a lot of things that need to be finished and destroyed and buried and done away with. And you can see in the politics of the U.S., especially with two revolutionary candidates polarizing the political landscape and electorate around very hardline right-wing issues, like as we see by Donald Trump and the Republicans, and very left-wing issues as seen by Bernie Sanders in the Democratic side. And in many ways, much of their policies and rhetoric sound very much the same. Both extremes tend to come together on some level. Now, there's a lot of big differences as well, which I'm not going to get into. This isn't going to be political. But what it is that both, let's say Trump pushing Republicans very far to the right, especially as it relates to social issues and themes like immigration and a lot of xenophobic rhetoric about keeping people out and like exclusion and pushing the debate very far to the right in some areas, and Bernie Sanders pushing things very far to the left even calling himself a socialist. Of course, he's being branded a communist, but everything being completely polarized. When you see polarity and polarizing, this is what the nodal axis is. This is why the nodal axis is so powerful. Fixations and obsessions, and the polarization of issues, or the polarization of any kind of opposite, is shown by the nodes. And this is the way the nodes work in any astrology chart. Wherever you're extreme, your extremes are shown by the nodes, where you completely reject one thing, which is Ketu, and completely are hypnotized by the opposite thing, which is Rahu. Eventually, we need to reconcile and bring these polar opposites together in us. So, all the stuff that you hear in the modern world, all the, Jungian shadows and all this, which is great stuff, this is totally shown by the lunar nodes. They are the shadows. They're the shadow planets, the Chaya Grahas. So when all the planets are in between one of the nodes, or in between both of the nodes, there's all of this collective unconscious shadowy stuff going on. So all of us right now are working through these collective power plays within ourselves, what we want for ourselves, what we want for the world. You can spiral this upward to include the philosophy, which is Jupiter, that we want for our government, which is Leo, Jupiter, Rahu, and Leo, and whether or not we need to, how we can best bring that about by some polarizing of the discussion between a Trump or a Bernie Sanders, or a more mainstream approach like a Hillary Clinton and a Rubio, or whoever the mainstream, let's say, political candidate would be in the U.S., or globally, things like how to support like refugees and immigrants and the old power structures and the financial structures. All of these things are getting polarized, and I'm sure people in other countries, because I do read the politics of other countries, not as much, but you see these same kind of things, in the politics, in North Korea now. I'm sure that, there's a lot working out in their culture in China, between the government control and regulation of their economies and the people, and certainly in Muslim countries, the desire and evolution for, of like Iranian people to want to participate more in the world rather than crippling, sanctions holding them back, and all of these themes and issues. Indians, rapid progress now with technology and with their currencies, or with their economy, growing very quickly. Canada and its very new progressive agenda, and so these issues are really culminating now, and a lot of it is a culmination of a lot of energy from the past, because they're in between Ketu and Rahu, not Rahu and Ketu. So Ketu is showing like a completion of things. I'll just say, make it a little political in the West. In the U.S., you can see this polarizing and this splitting of the ideologies of the right and the left, or the Republicans and Democrats. With, Donald Trump is a legitimate extension of what has been Republican rhetoric for quite a while, especially promulgated on talk radio and, Fox News and the Republican propaganda machine for years. Rush Limbaugh types and that group has created a Trump. These people have fomented and fueled a lot of divisive rhetoric. And by the way, I'm going to point the finger in the other direction as well. Of course, the liberal media as well, and their constant fixating on the Republican right as being, subhuman and xenophobic and racist, and all of these agendas too are naturally laying the groundwork for a Bernie Sanders to come out and get rid of all of the hardline institutions, the conservative institutions like the stock market, the monetary structures, those kinds of things. And also, again, these also come down to very liberal and progressive social issues like abortion, immigration, very polarized between right and left, very hardline right points of view like no abortion, no immigration, and hardline left, unlimited abortion, open borders. So all of these things are a culmination, and basically things are getting destroyed. It's not necessarily the awakening of a new thing. Of course, there's always the new from the shards of the old, but what's really driving it isn't the progressivism necessarily of Rahu, but it's the finishing of Ketu, because Ketu is the finishing, at least this part of it. This part that we're in right now, we're really looking and being gifted the possibility of focusing on this part of it, because the Kala Sarpa is going to break. But now, and what's been happening for the last several months, and it's been, 2 or 3 months now at least, I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's been off and on since, since the end of last year. It's been several months now, is we're seeing this culmination, this wave, we're riding this wave where this is the logical culmination of the selective media where, there used to be, at least to speak socially, there used to be where news wasn't, at least what used to be called news, wasn't propaganda. Now the news is propaganda. Instead of reporting the news, you report a news story, then you have spokesmen for each of the people come on and just argue their point of view. You have liberal media like MSNBC, you have conservative media like Fox News, you have CNN kind of in the middle, which just really reports either one. But there's not necessarily bias. There's this illusion of bias when actually it's just people in their own camps arguing their point. You don't have objective, commentary usually on the news, at least on the TV news, which is how most people get their news. So it's really just a lot of echo chambers. The right continuously, propagating their position, the left continuously propagating their position, saying we're right, they're wrong, we're right, they're wrong, over and over again. So we're seeing this complete schism now. And again, it's good to look at things like politics and the world. We're seeing it all over the world, East-West relations as well. And we also see it in our own life. And so this is a function of the lunar nodes and how the lunar nodes respond and how they show this confusion. But when they're in between Ketu and Rahu, it's the confusion of something finishing and seeing the next part of the cycle kind of churning toward the next thing that's going to lead us into the next wave, which is shown by the Rahu end of the node. So when the planets are in between the Rahu end of the node, when Rahu is the one that's leading the Kala Sarpa, then it winds up being a time where we're on the next edge of progress and of movement. So that's in a mundane chart. When you see it in an individual chart, of course, it's fixed because the person was born at that time. So when a person has the Kala Sarpa Yoga in their natal chart, you see which one are they in between. Which one is leading the Kala Sarpa? If the planets are in between Ketu, then they're very much about their life has a lot of kind of wisdom around a certain thing, and they know how they can fixate on that thing and come and benefit from all of this knowledge and wisdom from the past and kind of blast in there and be a solution, or at least benefit from all this knowledge of the past. But a lot of the things they do has a feeling of completing karma, and in their mind they have this awareness that they're finishing things and they're completing things, and things are getting settled. It's like they're ending a cycle. Ketu is about finishing a cycle, things completing. He's very much the completer of karma, which tends to also take things away, tends to destroy and obliterate something. Rahu can destroy something too, but Rahu also creates a lot. Rahu makes something in the world, because Rahu, the opposite end of the node, if someone has the Kala Sarpa and the planets are between Rahu, then the person feels like they're always on the edge of creating something new. They're creating something new. And of course, both of them have a similar look. To really analyze the nodes specifically, you have to see whether there are Raj Yogas formed and all of these other things that show when something gets created, when it gets destroyed. I'm talking more about the feeling in the person's mind. When Rahu is on the front end of the Kala Sarpa, there's this excited, creative, this, and the person is a real change agent in the sense of bringing in the new, bringing in the new paradigm. Of course, actually, I mean, it's hard to judge the results by which node, because again, if a person has a powerful Kala Sarpa and Ketu is at the front end, they can actually be a great change agent as well. But what they're drawing on to change is a different thing. Ketu is about all the wisdom and experience of the past and the consequences of the past, and either bringing that to bear in a very powerful way that creates something of, like enormous skill and mastery, or something that could be diabolical or whatever. That's how that's seen by the yogas. Or with Rahu, it's that kind of excited, stimulated, progressive Rahu feeling. As I record this in February of 2016, Ketu is the planets are between Ketu. This is why we're all, in some ways, there's a feeling of being sort of stuck as well. Like, what do we do? What do we do? There's like confusion about how to move forward with things, because it's almost like all of this momentum from the past is now culminating into something, and we don't really know what it is. This is a lot of what Ketu is. Ketu is where a lot of karmic past has culminated into a moment, and then that moment is finishing, it's completing, and as it's completing, we're often very confused. Later, we get some insight. Oh, it was this thing finishing. I was completing that thing. Oh, okay. So this is why we have this feeling that we're in the middle of completing a whole lot of stuff right now. All these things are getting completed. And there's a lot of pressure and stress about what they are. We're not even really sure what they are. Whereas again, when it's Rahu, it's like, okay, that thing is finished. Now this new thing is happening, and okay, now there's this and this. It's the same stress. Both ends of the node create a stress. But the stress is for a different reason. So Kala Sarpa, it's very powerful. And again, when it's in a natal chart, you can apply these same principles. Also really focus on planets that are joined either of the node. And notice which one, notice the sign axis, notice the house axis, and notice if the planets are in between Ketu and Rahu or in between Rahu and Ketu, to see whether it's a completion of karma or an activation of a new cycle.